And we are live. What's going on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn Live? It is Coach Rowe. Today is Wednesday. I'd like to welcome you to the first row. And if it is Wednesday, you should know what that means. It's time for the Wednesday word. That's Wednesday word. Jumping straight into it. Tonight's topic is healthy boundaries. As always, I like to share what I mean by my topic. So, what do I mean by the topic healthy boundaries? Really, what I mean by the topic healthy boundaries is how we can establish and use healthy boundaries in order to create balance and order in our lives. So tonight I have 3 tools for the first row that I would like to share with you in regards to this topic. Let's jump straight into it. Tool number 1 when it comes to healthy boundaries is it's never too late to establish a boundary. Man, boundaries are not they don't expire. Like, they may change, but they don't expire. So it doesn't matter if you establish a boundary at the beginning of a relationship, in the middle of a relationship, at the end of a relationship, or anywhere in between those points. It's never too late to establish a boundary. Really, what boundaries are, they are these going forward events, meaning that we may have done things differently yesterday, the day before yesterday, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 days ago, 2 minutes ago. We may have done things differently. However, if we decide that we are going to establish a boundary, no matter when we're establishing it, it really is a go forward event. And when I was thinking about this particular tool, what I really started thinking about is how the moment a boundary is established, they become enforceable. Like, hey, there was a boundary, there wasn't no boundary 5 minutes ago, and so that boundary wasn't being enforced. 5 minutes later, I decided I wanted to enforce that boundary. What's going on, Brother Bruce? I decided I wanted to enforce that boundary, and it becomes enforceable immediately. It's not like there's some delay. Well, okay, you got to give me time to warm up to the boundary. No, if I decide I have a boundary, then that boundary becomes enforceable when I relay that boundary. And so what I started thinking about was really like the life of a horse, or the different types of lives of a horse. And I was equating these different types of lives to a horse, or different states that a horse may be in, as different types of interactions. So when we first come into this world, we really don't know a whole lot about boundaries. We may have like some instincts on people we don't want to go to as babies. So we'll cry and be like, please don't put me in that person's arms. But we don't have a whole lot of boundaries. But so going back to that horse, where when we're first born, we're like a horse that's in the wild. There really aren't very many boundaries to a horse that is in the wild. It can go where it wants to go. It can kind of do whatever it wants to do to a certain extent. And there's no boundaries to that. And really, that's how we kind of enter the world, is we have this free-for-all interaction with everybody. Why? Because we don't have a voice to establish boundaries, and we don't even know what boundaries are yet. But then you take that same horse that's in the wild. Let's say it's captured and it's brought to a farm. And in that farm, it's a gated farm. Maybe it could be like, 60 acres. It doesn't matter how many acres, the farm, but it's gated. And so now, once the horse had access to the world, now the horse is kind of, we're going to say, there's, I guess there's a limit or a boundary that's established. However, there's a broad breadth of interaction that can still take place. The horse can go from one end of the fence all the way to the other end of the fence. The horse is still able to run. The horse is still able to do things that it would do in the wild. However, it's not free for all interactions. And so when I think about our boundaries, again, it's a place where we begin to establish our boundaries. Maybe it's in elementary school. Maybe it's in junior high school. Maybe it's in high school. Maybe it's a little later in life, in college, or in our careers, where we're establishing boundaries. But we still have this broad breadth of what we can do with these interactions, with the boundaries that we establish. Then I started thinking about the horse that gets brought into the corral. Let's say you're trying to actually tame the horse, and so you're bringing them into a horse corral, which, if you don't know what that is, it's like a little circle. It's a little gate, circular gate, where they can train the horse at and run the horse through different training practices. What's going on, cousin? But now it's brought into this corral, and it's kind of in this confined space. So where in the beginning we start off, we don't have any boundaries. Then we kind of establish some broad boundaries. Now we're in this place where we're kind of training what boundaries we're really going to enact or enforce. in our lives, and in essence, in the lives of those who want to interact in our lives. And then I thought about the last place where the horse is at, where in regards to boundaries, where I thought about a barn at first, but then I was like, well, there's still pretty a good amount of space in the barn that the horse can kind of maneuver around a little bit, maybe spin around and stuff. But I started thinking about a horse trailer, where a horse is truly confined to standing. Like, he can't even lay down in the horse's trailer, because the horse trailer is designed to be able to transport the horse safely. And that's where our boundaries as individuals begin to constrain interactions in our life. It may even weed out certain types of interactions in our life. One of the things for me that I'm very big on about boundaries is, hey, look, I'm not really into a whole lot of like drug usage, so I don't really keep that around me. Now, do I know people who use drugs? Yeah. Does it bother me? No, not at all. But I'm very aware if I'm around somebody who's using drugs, I want to make sure it's not something that we're going to all get arrested for because they're using it, because I know I'm not using it. So there's that aspect. For me, I don't do a lot of overconsumption of alcohol. I might have a drink, I don't know, maybe 4 times a year, if that. But I don't overly consume alcohol because I don't like the way overconsumption of alcohol makes me feel. So it's a boundary for me. So if I'm in an environment where people are like, shot, 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 shot. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know if you guys are talking to me or not, but I'm done. I already had my one drink, if I even had that. So I started thinking about that trailer in where we begin to constrain we begin to constrain our interactions with the boundaries that we're setting. And all of these boundaries are very fluid in how they move. Sometimes we may have very hard boundaries. Think about when somebody breaks up and the relationship comes to an end. 2 people break up, and now there's some animosity there. So boundaries, new boundaries that didn't exist when the relationship was doing well, now arise and erect themselves. And in that, it will create constraints where don't call me, don't come to my house, don't come to my job, don't do whatever. Like, all these boundaries start coming up. Whereas maybe over time, those boundaries begin to recede a little bit, and the emotional emotional collateral damage that has been done kind of begins to ease a little bit. And now, okay, well, you can come by my job and bring me lunch. Or you can come by the house and we'll watch a movie. That's how this breakup to makeup situations happen. There's a boundary that's set up. We broke up. It's over. And then there's all these boundaries that come with that. And then as that emotional tension or pressure begins to subside, now all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe we can work things out and try to do another round, and take another chance, take another shot. So that is what tool number one is number one, it's never too late to establish a boundary. And the other side of that is it's never too late to reestablish a boundary either. So it is not our responsibility to make our boundaries convenient for others. I think sometimes when you may have the characteristics of maybe a people pleaser or wanting people to like you, we tend to silence or mute what our boundaries are. However, if I have a boundary, and maybe let's say you've gotten to a position of trust with me, and now there's a boundary that I have with people who I don't have a relationship of trust with, that you've gotten past because now I trust you, and you do something that betrays that trust, or you do something that makes me question whether or not I should be trusting you, it's okay for me to reestablish that boundary. I don't have to say, well, they already got past that boundary, and so it's not fair for me to re-erect that boundary and hold them accountable to it. Oh, it's okay. And actually, it's advised to hold people accountable to the boundaries that you feel like you need to place with them. And some boundaries are universal, as in they are a standard of expectation of everyone we meet. One of my boundaries is I don't do disrespect. So let's not be disrespectful. We can disagree. We can argue. Heck, you can even yell if that's what you need to do. You can't yell at me for long, but you can yell if that's what you need to do. But after that, we're going to get back to a space of respect, or we're going to stop the conversation before it becomes physical. And then the last part of this tool is our boundaries are for us to decide. Not only are we not required to have boundaries that are convenient to people, but they're for us. They're for us to decide. It's deciding what is best for us. Understanding that we may have boundaries with strangers that we don't have with loved ones. We may have boundaries with people we're getting to know that we don't have with people that we have either no desire to know or have no opportunity to know. You also may have a boundary that doesn't resonate well with people, and that's okay, because that is what happens sometimes when boundaries bounce off of boundaries. Well, I don't like people, let's say, who smack their food. I don't even know. But I don't like people who smack their food, so I don't go to dinner with people who smack their food. And then you have somebody who's like, that doesn't really bother me, and the fact that you have that as a boundary is stupid. Well, that's because your guys' boundaries are bouncing off of each other. That is not a boundary that they have. So their expectation is like, hey, I like to go to dinner with people. I like to have fellowship and eat and share a good meal and share a good conversation. And so they're now looking at your boundary like, well, why would you let something as insignificant as smacking to them, because smacking does drive me a little wild, but as insignificant as smacking to them, why would you let that keep you from sharing a meal with somebody? Again, our boundaries are ours to decide. Your boundaries are yours to decide. And if somebody doesn't like your boundary, then that is their boundary that they have to decide, hey, do I want to play within the confines of that construct? Or do I want to go ahead and move on and maybe develop a relationship elsewhere? All that, tool number one, it's never too late to reestablish a boundary, it's too late to establish a boundary, or it's never too late to reestablish a boundary. So that's tool number one. Tool number two, when it comes to healthy boundaries, is set two-way boundaries. A lot of times when we are setting boundaries, we believe we are setting boundaries for others. We are setting the rules of engagement for others. A good example, where I think I've seen on Instagram, well, if he doesn't make six figures, then I'm not interested in him. You're setting that boundary for somebody else, because you're saying, I don't want you in my space if this is not what you bring to the table, maybe as a relationship partner. But the reality is there's two sides, and our boundaries are two ways. Boundaries are designed to hold both parties accountable. So if you really mean like, hey, if he doesn't make six figures, I'm not interested in being in my life, then that means you now have to hold yourself accountable to that boundary as well. If not, it's not really a true boundary. And again, don't get me wrong, boundaries can be fluid. Maybe you meet Mr. Right and he makes $6 an hour and you love him. Hats off to you. Pull that boundary down. But when I say when we set a boundary and they flow both ways, what I'm saying is that they really require effort from both sides. You might meet, like I said, that dream person, that person you've been waiting for. You might meet a person who's super cool, who is on the outside of your boundary. And sometimes you might have to hold yourself accountable to your boundary. The reason why you may have to hold yourself accountable to your boundary isn't because the person isn't wonderful. It's that boundary that you erected. You erected it for a reason. And anytime you feel like you're questioning the reason you erected a boundary, anytime, my recommendation is take a moment to identify why the boundary was erected in the first place. Because if you can connect back to that, now you can make a truly educated decision as to whether or not that boundary still serves you. If I decide, like right now I have a boundary constraint on my diet. If I decide, okay, I'm going to eat outside of that constraint, I'm asking myself before I do that, well, what's the reason why I'm eating the way I'm eating right now? Well, it's to make sure that my blood pressure is good, to make sure my A1C1 levels are good, or A1C levels, I can't remember what they're called, to make sure that my health is good and make sure I have the energy and fuel I need to work out. So if that's what I need, and I want to eat a cookie or a slice of cake or whatever it may be, then I'm asking myself, well, what's the objective of this boundary of limiting, and how far does this limit go? Is it every single day I have to be on track and eat the right exact thing, or then I'm breaching my boundary? Or is it that my boundary actually has some flexibility in that? And so when I say set two-way boundaries, I'm not saying that boundaries have to be rigid, but if they're two ways, that means they're designed to keep some things out And they're also designed to help keep you in check to the things that you say you want in life. And so if there is some flexibility or wiggle room there, or if there is a door that you can open in this boundary and say, there are some exceptions to the rule, my recommendation is to have some exceptions to your boundary, just like I have exceptions to my diet. I don't have like, oh, well, every Friday is a cheat day or anything like that. It's like, hey, if I want some gummy bears, it's okay to eat some gummy bears. What it's not okay to do is to eat 3 bags of gummy bears. And so that boundary stays erected, but I can let some gummy bears into my healthy diet. The other thing is that the reason why boundaries, it's good to understand that you're setting two-way boundaries is that it really benefits both parties. It actually, I want to say it protects both parties, not just benefits them, but it protects both parties. Because when we allow people into our boundaries, when we kind of had either a gut feeling that we shouldn't have made an exception for them to come in past our boundaries, or even I'll go even further, because I know it's constant that when relationships come to an end, somebody always says, oh, they're stalking me. They won't let me be. They won't leave me alone. Well, if we understand why we have certain boundaries, whether it's, let's say it's not even a romantic relationship, let's just say it's a friendship. Well, there's certain things that I do with my friends that I wouldn't do with an acquaintance. Like, I would go on vacation with a friend. I wouldn't go on vacation with an acquaintance. And the reason being is because my expectation when I'm on vacation is that I'm able to relax, I'm able to recuperate, regenerate, and be ready for the next time that I'm going to either get back to work or get back to it. So if I start doing things that I would do for a friend, for an acquaintance, now not only do I get confused on whether or not this person is actually a friend and not an acquaintance, and start having expectations of them like I would of my friends, they may also believe, well, man, we're super close. We're the best of friends. And oh man, I'm so glad to have a friend like them. And it creates this confusion that also creates chaos. And now all of a sudden, when you don't come through as the friend that they thought you were, or they don't come through because you're having these moments of feeling like they're a friend, but they're not really a friend, now all of a sudden there's conflict, there's frustration, and then that's when we get to the next tool. Also, before we move on to the next tool, a bonus is boundaries always need to be communicated. When you're setting a two-way boundary, you can't be like, I have a boundary, and then just think what the boundary is to yourself and expect people to understand that boundary. They have to be communicated. They have to be verbalized or written, or some method of communication that has to be used to convey what that boundary is. And what that does is it holds you accountable to make sure that you're, again, setting a two-way boundary and not just a one-way boundary. Because when we set the one-way boundary, what we're really doing in essence is giving ourselves permission to be the victim, giving ourselves permission to blame other people for their breach into our boundaries, or their disregard for our boundaries. But sometimes we can be the culprit who's actually creating that situation, and it's not the people who are coming beyond the boundary. So that's tool number 2. And then finally, on healthy boundaries, tool number 3 is set boundaries proactively. Really, it's about being proactive. Setting healthy boundaries is about being proactive. And the reason I say that is because when we are reactive to boundaries, and I'm going to get into this in a second, but when we're reactive in the process of creating our boundaries, typically we are in some emotionally compromised state, whether we're positively emotion compromised, I love her, I can't live without her, I'll suffocate if I'm away from her, or we are in a negative emotional state, compromised state, where it's like, I can't stand her, she broke my heart, she cheated on me, she did this, whatever it may be. When we are in either emotional state, trying to erect healthy boundaries is extremely difficult, because we will typically decide things like what I call the never again statements. I'll never again trust another woman with my heart. I'll never again do this. I'll never again do that. I'll never again work for her. I'll never land. And we erect like 85 different boundaries from one emotional experience. because instead of taking the time to process the emotion and figure out what we can learn and what healthy boundaries we can establish, we go into overload on construction mode to up building this boundary, next boundary, next boundary, next boundary, next boundary, until you got so many boundaries in between you and other people that it almost becomes not worth it for people to want to engage with you. And so being proactive to set emotional boundaries, it's almost like how when we're in a car, my family wears a seatbelt when we're in the car. We put our seatbelts on. Matter of fact, when we used to get in the car, we would race to see who could get their seatbelt on the fastest, just so I made sure they had their seatbelts on. But then we would race to see who would get their seatbelts on the fastest. Everybody has their seatbelts. Now, we're not going out with the expectation of where can we cause an accident to test these seatbelts. That's not what we're wearing the seatbelt for. We're wearing the seatbelt for in the event that an accident occurs, or in the event that we encounter something where the car puts our lives in danger, we have at least some type of safety or protection to keep us from flying out the window or from flinging all over the car. The same thing can be said about healthy boundaries. We're not establishing. Well, some people do, but I should say I don't think we should be establishing boundaries based on, well, just in case this happens, and just in case that happens, and just in case I come across. You'll be establishing boundaries all day long, but you should be establishing boundaries that will keep you safe. And when I say keep you safe, what I'm really saying is that keep you in a position to make the best decisions possible for your life. Boundaries, again, are not about other people. They are about us. They are about creating a space, creating an environment, creating a habitat in which we are safe, we are secure, and we are capable of making the best decisions that we can for our lives. So that's tool number 3, is be proactive. Set boundaries proactively. Be proactive in the way you set boundaries, because if you're waiting until you're encountering a reason that you need a boundary, somebody may already be past the fence, and now you got to work to get them out of there so that you can then erect the boundary. So that's what I have for you guys tonight. Really quick to go over the tools. Tool number 1 is it's never too late to establish a boundary or reestablish a boundary. Boundaries do not have expiration dates, and they are fluid. You can erect one and take it down and put it back up as many times as you need to until you figure out the cadence, either the cadence, the seasonality, or the right characteristics that need to experience that boundary to stay out of your space. Tool number 2 is set two-way boundaries. Again, hold both parties accountable. That's what that's about. Have your boundaries designed in a way to where they hold other people accountable for if they want to interact with you, but also hold you accountable to if you want to interact with other people as well. And then tool number 3 is set boundaries proactively. Be proactive in your approach to setting boundaries. Don't start, or I don't want to tell you what to do, but I recommend not setting boundaries from an emotionally compromised state. Work on trying to set them when you're at an emotionally neutral state in which you can make clear, concise decisions as to what you want in your life, what you want out of your life. So those are the 3 tools that I have for you tonight. As always with the Wednesday Word, I like to share a personal story, something that got me thinking about the topic. And tonight, it's actually interesting. The thing that got me thinking about this topic was a couple months back at work. I work really early in the morning, from 6:30 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. And a couple weeks, maybe actually a couple months back, I was noticing a trend on my work calendar. I was noticing that I would have work meetings at 4 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock. And at first it didn't really bother me because I don't mind working extra hours if the work needs extra hours. However, there came a point one day where I was like, man, I'm so tired. And I was looking at my week, and I had worked I was working like 10, 12-hour days back to back to back to back. And it was because it was like I was supposed to get off at 3 o'clock, but then there would be a meeting at like 4 o'clock. So it didn't really make sense to try to do something for an hour, then have to come back to work. So I'd end up working from 3 to 4. And then I'd get something after that meeting, after working from 4 to 5 on the meeting, and be like, okay, well, now I need to do some of the work while it's still fresh in my head. So now I'm working and I'm getting off at like 8 o'clock. That's a very long day, 14-hour day, I think, that I'm working. And so I started to get fatigued because it was like, yo, I'm still starting my workday at 6:30 in the morning, but then I'm not ending my workday sometimes until 6, 7 o'clock at night. And my boundary for myself is, hey, that fluidness of a boundary was, I have no problem putting in extra hours, no problem at all. However, some of the meetings weren't meetings that needed to take place at that time of day. They could have taken place earlier, had the planning been set up that way. And so what I started doing is I started creating a boundary. I went into my calendar and I actually put myself as out of office before I would start work. And I put myself out of office at the end of my day. So now when people were looking at my calendar, they'd be able to see, oh, Billy's off at that time. He's not available. Before, my calendar was just open. It was just blank. It was like, if I don't have a meeting or something that I'm doing, it says that I'm available. And it's not realistic. This is the two-way part of my boundary. It's not realistic for me to expect everyone to know that I'm off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, especially if they start later in their day. So I set a boundary that says, hey, these are the times that I'm out of the office. Here's the chunk of time that you have to schedule things with me. If it's urgent, you'll send it to me and I'll see that it's during my out of office time. And then I have the ability to say, hey, let's reschedule that for another time, or accept it or decline it. Like, those are the things what I mean when I say establishing healthy boundaries. Now, I don't feel like I'm any less of an employee because I'm saying, hey, I want to create some boundaries and some balance on my workload. I don't feel any less of an employee for that. I feel like I'm protecting the integrity of my work, because by having that boundary for me, that healthy boundary for me, it keeps me from being resentful about my work. It keeps me from being resentful that, what meeting am I going to have after hours today? It keeps me out of that space, because now I bring back in the boundary for myself of keeping a healthy space to make choices that work for me, to where I don't feel bad saying, hey, you know what? I'm out of the office at that time. Can we reschedule it for this time? Hey, is it priority for me to be on that meeting because I'm actually off at this time and that would drag my day an additional X amount of hours? Is it okay if I miss that meeting because I see there's a bunch of people and I'm not sure if I need to be on that meeting? Now I'm able to have that dialogue, able to have that communication with people. And it is because I have erected a healthy boundary that forces me to be able to I don't want to say forces, it requires for me to be able to make a decision on if I want to participate after hour work meetings. And then it also gives the outside an opportunity to say, oh, wait, it says this person's out of office at this time. Now, what doesn't work is if I say, well, I'm going to put this time where I'm out of the office, and then I'm still accepting meetings left and right, or I'm still just allowing people to willy-nilly schedule into my schedule. Yeah, no, I'm not going to allow that. I'm going to respect the boundary that I've erected, because I understand I made that boundary in a space when I was fatigued, but I wasn't emotionally compromised. I wasn't mad that, oh man, I had this meeting. I don't work a 12-hour day. I'm putting everything out of office. No. In fact, I think I took a weekend and then did it on a Monday where I was like, okay, now I'm going to have this set up to where it shows that I'm out of office. So that's what really got me thinking about that. That's the story that I have for tonight, is establishing healthy boundaries. It's almost like a carryover from yesterday's Carolyn Michelle and Billy Rowe Live. Taking your time back, being responsible and accountable to your bandwidth. Really, that's what building healthy boundaries is about. It's about setting up a space to where you are responsible for the things that you are encountering, and you are responsible for the things that you are deflecting out of your life. So that's what I have for you guys today. I appreciate you so much for tuning in. As always, if you have not gone to firstrow.com and got your copy of Fire Your Job, Hire Your Passion, and the accompanying journal, I don't know what you're doing. Head over to firstrow.com tonight. Order your copy tonight. Get your copy sometime by next week, depending on how you pay for your shipping. And if you have gotten a copy and you haven't shared this with somebody, I highly encourage you to share this book with someone. I believe it would make a change and a difference in their lives. So don't forget that. But also, the next thing you can see, not on the first row, but on thegrindtofine.com, my host, Terilyn Michelle, co-host Terilyn Michelle on Terilyn Michelle and Billy Rowe Live. She has her Grind to Find, the Grind to Find podcast this Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You do not want to miss this week's show. Telling you, you don't want to miss any of the shows. The shows are just fire. And then next Tuesday, we actually will not have a Terilyn Michelle and Billy Rowe Live because I am unfortunately and fortunately out of town and will not be able to meet that obligation. But when we do come back the following Tuesday, which I don't know why I keep forgetting what this date is. When we come back the following Tuesday, which would be, one moment, September 13th. There we go. And I don't know why I forgot that, but it would be September 13th. We're actually going to have a live panel discussion. Those are really fun. So I recommend you tune in on September 13th for the live panel discussion. And the topic will be announced on social media. And then, as always, next Wednesday, though I'm out of town, I will have a Wednesday Word premiere that will be pre-recorded so that you will still be able to encounter the Wednesday Word on Wednesday. Word. So other than that, that's all I have for you guys today. I appreciate you so much. Casual, you are late, but that's all right. You catch the replay. And see, I already answered your question. There will be a Wednesday Word. But other than that, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for rocking with First Row as long as you guys have. Thank you for engaging in the content. Thank you for engaging in deeper conversations in your own circles. As always, if you like this video, please share it. If you do share it, please like it. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you have subscribed, hit that notification bell so you know when we are live on the First Row. Until the next time, one love, peace, and God bless. Thanks for sitting on the First Row.